The snow came without warning. One moment the sky over the Black Hills of South Dakota was pale gray and heavy, and the next, it cracked open and poured. White sheets of ice and wind swept across the flatlands with a fury that felt almost personal, as if the land itself had decided to push everyone off it. It was the kind of storm that old people whispered about and young people never believed, until they were standing inside it. Clara Dawes had been standing inside it for almost 2 hours. She was 26 years old, a nurse from Chicago, and she had driven out to the Pine Ridge Reservation to volunteer for 3 weeks at the community clinic. Her supervisor back home had told her it would be a life-changing experience. He had not mentioned that the rental car might die on a gravel road 12 miles from the nearest town, or that her phone would lose signal the moment the engine went cold. She had tried to stay in the car. That was the smart thing to do. She knew the rules: stay with the vehicle, keep moving to generate body heat, don't panic. But then the temperature inside the car had dropped below freezing, and her fingers had stopped working properly, and she had made the decision that many people make when they are afraid and alone. She started walking. The wind was merciless. It drove the snow sideways, slicing against her face and filling her ears with a sound like screaming. She had pulled her thin jacket tighter, but it was a city jacket, meant for Chicago winters, for walking between warm buildings, not for surviving open plains in a blizzard. She had no hat. Her gloves were thin. Her boots were the kind with a small heel, bought more for appearance than survival. She walked without knowing where she was going. There were no landmarks, no road signs, no lights in any direction. Just white. Everything was white, and the cold had moved past discomfort into something deeper and more dangerous. She had stopped shivering 20 minutes ago, which she knew, in the back of her clouding mind, was a very bad sign. Shivering meant your body was still fighting. When the shivering stopped, your body was beginning to give up. She fell twice. The second time she didn't get up right away. She lay there in the snow, face turned sideways, one cheek pressed against the frozen ground, and she thought about her mother's kitchen. The yellow walls. The smell of coffee. She thought about how strange it was to be dying in a beautiful place and to have nobody know it was happening. She was not dramatic about this. She was not crying or praying. She was simply very tired, and the snow around her was very soft, and part of her brain was starting to suggest, in the most reasonable and quiet voice, that lying down was not the worst idea she had ever had. That was when she heard the horse. She heard it before she saw it, the deep, rhythmic thump of hooves on frozen ground, muffled by snow but unmistakable. She turned her head, her neck moving slowly and stiffly, and through the white blur she saw a shape coming toward her. Dark and large and solid. A horse and rider moving through the storm as if the wind meant nothing to them. The horse stopped a few feet from her. She looked up. The rider was a man, broad-shouldered, wearing a heavy coat, his face half hidden under a wide-brimmed hat dusted white with snow. He looked down at her without expression. Then he swung off the horse in one smooth motion and crouched in the snow beside her. "Can you stand?" he asked. His voice was calm and low. Not panicked. Not alarmed. Just asking a practical question. "I don't know," she said. Her words came out thick and slow. He didn't wait to find out. He slid one arm under her knees and the other behind her back and lifted her like she weighed nothing. She felt the heat coming off him through his coat, real, solid, living heat, and her body moved toward it instinctively, the way a plant turns toward light without being told to. He set her on the horse in front of him, pulled his heavy coat open and wrapped it around both of them, and turned the animal away from the direction she had been walking. Away from whatever cold, empty end was waiting for her in the white. "I've got you," he said. "Don't let go." She held on. The horse moved through the blizzard with a confidence that Clara found almost unbelievable. It didn't stumble. It didn't hesitate. It seemed to know where it was going even when she could see nothing beyond 10 feet in any direction. The man behind her guided it with the smallest movements, a shift of weight, a soft word in a language she didn't recognize. The animal listened. It trusted him completely, and watching that trust, Clara found she had no choice but to trust him too. She learned his name before they reached the house. He told her it the way people offer something simple and essential, without ceremony. "My name is Joseph Swiftwind," he said, his voice close to her ear, nearly swallowed by the wind. "I live a mile from here. We'll get you warm." She wanted to ask more, who he was, why he was out riding in a blizzard, how he had possibly found her, but her tongue was heavy and slow and she was focused on the single task of staying conscious. She fixed her eyes on the dark shape of the horse's neck and counted its steps. 1, 2, 3. It was something to do. Something to hold on to. The house appeared through the storm like an answer to a prayer she hadn't said. It was low and square and solidly built, with light burning in the windows, a warm amber light that looked to Clara's half-frozen eyes like something miraculous. Behind it were a barn and a fence line. A few other structures she couldn't identify. A working ranch, small but real. Joseph stopped the horse near the door and dismounted first, then lifted her down again. He knocked twice on the door, a signal more than a knock, and a woman opened it before the second sound had finished. She was older, perhaps 60, with a round face and dark eyes that took in the situation without a single moment of surprise. She stepped back immediately, making room, and spoke in Lakota to Joseph. He answered and she nodded, already moving. "My aunt," Joseph said to Clara. "Her name is Ruth. She'll take care of you." Ruth led her inside by both hands as if guiding a child. The warmth hit Clara like a wall, not overwhelming but deep and real, the kind of warmth that comes from a fire that has been burning all day. A wood stove crackled in the corner of the main room. The floor was covered in rugs of different colors and textures. There were photographs on the walls, a shelf lined with what looked like hand-painted jars, and in the center of the room, a wide couch already being loaded with blankets by a teenage girl who looked up at Clara with large, curious eyes. "Sit," Ruth said. Her English was clear and firm. Clara sat. Or rather, her legs bent and she fell into the couch and it caught her. Ruth began working on her boots immediately, pulling them off with practical hands, then her wet socks and wrapping her feet in a thick dry towel while talking quietly to the girl, her granddaughter, Clara would later learn, who went to the kitchen and came back with a cup of something hot. Tea or something like it. Clara held the cup in both hands and let the heat travel up into her fingers. "Drink it slow," Ruth said. Clara drank it slow. Joseph came back inside after putting the horse away. He stood near the door and removed his coat and hat, and Clara saw him properly for the first time. He was tall, perhaps 40, with a strong, weathered face that showed his years outdoors. His eyes were dark and direct. He wasn't looking at her with pity or curiosity. He was looking at her the way someone looks at a problem that has been solved, with quiet satisfaction. "The storm will last through the night," he said. "You'll stay here." It wasn't a question. It wasn't even really an invitation. It was simply what was going to happen. "Thank you," Clara said. The words felt small and completely inadequate. He nodded once, then went to sit near the stove. Ruth brought him a cup too, and the teenage girl, whose name Clara would learn was May, sat cross-legged on the floor and watched Clara with the open, unapologetic curiosity of someone who had not yet learned to pretend not to stare. Clara found she didn't mind. There was no hostility in it. There was only interest. Outside, the storm continued to rage. Inside, the fire burned steady and low. Clara's fingers began to hurt as the feeling came back into them, which Ruth said was a good sign. The tea was warm and sweet and tasted faintly of something Clara couldn't identify but which calmed her in a way she hadn't felt in years. She was alive. She was warm. She was somewhere she had never been, with people she didn't know, and somehow, in a way that made no complete logical sense, she felt completely safe. Clara slept on the couch under 3 blankets and did not dream. When she woke up, the storm was still outside but quieter. A steady snowfall now instead of a violence, the wind reduced to a low hum around the corners of the house. The fire in the wood stove had been built back up while she slept. Someone had covered her feet with an extra blanket. She lay still for a moment, listening. There were voices from the kitchen. The smell of coffee and something baking. The ordinary sounds of a household morning, as familiar and grounding as anything she had ever known. She sat up slowly. Her body ached in ways she hadn't expected. A deep soreness in her muscles, a heaviness in her joints that reminded her of how close she had actually come. She looked at her hands. They were fine. No frostbite. No lasting damage. She understood in a clear and quiet way that she was lucky to be sitting here at all. Ruth appeared from the kitchen and looked her over with efficient, experienced eyes. "Good," she said simply. "You're up. Come eat." The kitchen table was covered with a plastic tablecloth printed with bright flowers. May sat at one end with a bowl of cereal, still in her pajamas, reading something on a battered phone. Joseph sat at the other end with coffee and a map spread out in front of him. He looked up when Clara came in. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Sore," she admitted. "But okay. Much better than I should be." He nodded as if this confirmed something he already knew. Over breakfast he told her about himself, not all at once, not in a rush, but in the way that people talk when they are comfortable and have nowhere urgently to be. He was the chief of his community, a role passed to him 6 years ago after the death of his father. It was not a ceremonial title. It meant real responsibility, managing relationships with local government, organizing resources for families in need, navigating disputes, showing up when things went wrong. He had been out the previous evening visiting an elderly man who lived alone 5 miles away. He had been heading home when he had seen the shape of her in the snow. "I almost didn't stop," he said. He said it plainly, not as confession but as fact. "At that distance, in that weather, I thought it might be a deer that had fallen." The casualness of that sentence hit Clara harder than almost anything else he had said. The thin margin between being found and being lost, between the story she was living now and the one that would have had no ending at all. "What made you check?" she asked. He thought about it for a moment. "The color," he said. "A deer would have been brown or gray. What I saw was red." Her jacket. Her ridiculous, fashionable, city-bought jacket in deep red. She laughed, a short, involuntary sound that surprised even her. He looked at her with something that might have been the beginning of a smile. After breakfast, while Ruth cleaned up and May got ready for school, Joseph showed Clara around what he called the land. It was a short tour, limited by the snow, but enough for her to understand the shape of the place. The ranch had been in his family for 4 generations, he told her. His great-great-grandfather had been one of the signers of an agreement with the federal government. An agreement, Joseph said without bitterness but with precision, that had not been honored. His family had lost land and gained very little in return. What remained was what they had built themselves, piece by piece, decade by decade. He spoke about this history the way someone speaks about weather, as something real and present, a force that shapes your life whether you acknowledge it or not. There was no performance in it. No anger on display, no invitation for her sympathy. He was simply telling her the truth about where she was standing. Clara listened. She was good at listening, it was something her patients had always valued about her, but this was different. This was not clinical. This was the kind of listening you do when someone is handing you something fragile and true, and you understand without being told, that it deserves to be held carefully. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, not unkindly. He looked at her directly. "Because you're here," he said. "And because you'll leave. And I think the people who pass through should know something real about a place. Not just that it is cold and far away." She felt something shift inside her at those words. Something small but important. A door opening that she hadn't known was closed. The road wasn't cleared until the afternoon of the second day. Clara didn't leave. She told herself it was practical. The roads were still dangerous, the car needed a tow, she had no signal to arrange one yet. All of this was true. But she also knew, somewhere quieter and more honest inside herself, that she wasn't ready to go. Something about this place had its hand on her, gently but firmly, and she was still figuring out what it meant. She spent the second day helping. That was simply what happened when you were inside a working household. You found the rhythm of it and moved within it. She helped Ruth prepare a large pot of stew that was apparently going to be delivered to several families in the community who had been hit hardest by the storm. She helped May with math homework, sitting at the flower tablecloth table with pencil and paper, talking through equations with the teenager's skeptical but eventually convinced attention. She carried firewood. She washed dishes. She did the things that needed doing because they needed doing, and because doing them made her feel less like a burden and more like a person. In the late afternoon, Joseph took her with him to make the deliveries. They drove in his truck, an old but well-maintained vehicle with a heater that worked and a radio that played country music softly between static. The roads were rough and white, tracked with tire marks from the few other vehicles that had ventured out. Clara held a covered pot in her lap and watched the landscape pass. She saw things she hadn't expected. A community that was poor by every material measure she could think of, houses that needed repair, vehicles past their prime, roads that were the last to be plowed by the county. But she also saw something that didn't fit neatly into the story she had carried with her from the city, the vague and second-hand story she had absorbed without quite realizing it, the one that cast this place entirely as a place of struggle and suffering and need. She saw a woman who came to her door and hugged Joseph before taking the pot, and the way her eyes filled not with pity for herself but with warmth for him. She saw an old man who told a long joke in Lakota that made Joseph laugh with genuine full-body laughter that Clara had not heard from him before, a laugh that changed his face completely. She saw children running between houses even in the cold, shrieking with the pure and urgent joy of children who do not yet know they are supposed to feel sorry for themselves. She saw pride. She saw love. She saw community, the real kind, not the word on a poster but the actual daily repeated practice of it. At the last stop, an older woman came outside specifically to speak to Clara. She took both of Clara's hands in her own dry, strong ones and looked at her seriously. "Joseph found you," she said. Yes, Clara said. He is like his father, the woman said. His father never passed something living without checking on it. She said it as the highest possible compliment and then went back inside. On the drive back, Clara didn't speak for a long time. Joseph let the silence sit without filling it. Can I ask you something personal? She finally said. You can ask. Do you ever feel angry? She said. About all of it, the history, the things that were taken, the way things still are. Because I don't hear anger from you, and I can't figure out if that means you've gotten past it or if you're just not showing me. He was quiet for a moment. The truck moved over a rough patch of road and the pot in her lap clinked softly. Both maybe, he said. Some days one more than the other. He looked at the road. But anger that has no place to go becomes poison. I have seen what it does to people. What it did to people I love. He paused. I choose not to carry it in a way that destroys me. That is not the same as not feeling it. Clara looked at his profile in the thin winter light. She thought about the things she carried. Her own quiet frustrations, her sense of drifting, the reason she had come out here at all, the things she hadn't been able to name but had been running toward or away from. I think I came here to find something, she said. I don't know what. He glanced at her just briefly. Most people who come here are looking for something, he said. A few of them even find it. She turned back to the window and watched the snow-covered land roll past, wide and still and indifferent and beautiful. On the morning of the third day, the tow truck came and took her rental car to a shop in the nearest town. The mechanic there, a man with oil-stained hands and a warm, brief manner, told her it needed a part that would take 2 days to arrive. He said it without apology, the way mechanics say things they cannot change. Clara called the clinic and rearranged her start date. She called her mother, who cried briefly and then asked too many questions in the way that only mothers do. She made the call she needed to make and then she walked back to where Joseph was waiting in his truck and she got in, and he drove her back to the ranch without asking if that was what she wanted because he already knew. Those last 2 days had a different quality. Something had been established between them, not romance, not yet, perhaps not ever in that simple form, but something more complicated and more lasting. A mutual recognition. The quiet acknowledgement that the two of them were, in the way that mattered, paying attention to the same things. He brought her to a community meeting that evening, held in a building that served as everything from a meeting hall to a church to a gymnasium, depending on the day. She sat in the back and listened to people discuss the storm damage, the roads, a family whose roof had partially collapsed, the distribution of emergency supplies. The meeting was conducted mostly in Lakota, and Joseph translated in low, unhurried murmurs beside her. She understood less than 10% of what was said in words. She understood almost everything in feeling. After the meeting, a man approached her. He was perhaps 70, with slow eyes and an unhurried manner. He asked her what she did and she told him she was a nurse. He nodded slowly as if she had confirmed something. We have been waiting for a nurse, he said. We had one. She left 4 months ago. We have been waiting. He said it without accusation or manipulation. He said it as simple fact, the way Joseph said everything. And the weight of it landed on Clara with a precision that surprised her. She had come to volunteer for 3 weeks. She had arrived nearly dead in a blizzard. She had been carried in on a horse by a man who had stopped because he saw the color red. And now an old man with slow eyes was telling her, simply and without drama, that people had been waiting. She didn't make any promises that night. She went back to the ranch and sat by the fire with Ruth, who was beating something small and intricate, and she thought for a long time without speaking. Ruth didn't ask what she was thinking. She simply beaded, and the fire burned, and the silence between them was the kind that doesn't need to be filled. On the morning she left, Joseph walked her to the car the mechanic had delivered. The sky was brilliant and cold, the snow from the storm packed hard now and glittering in the early light. Everything was sharp-edged and clear in the way that only happens after a great storm has passed. He handed her something before she opened the car door. A small, flat stone, smooth and dark, with a marking on it she didn't recognize. My mother made that, he said. She said it was for travelers. He paused. She made several. She believed travelers would always come. Clara held it in her palm. It was warm from being in his pocket. I'm going to come back, she said. She didn't say it dramatically. She said it the way she had heard him say things, plainly as fact as what was going to happen. He looked at her for a moment. I know, he said. She got in the car. The engine started, strong and steady. She pulled down the long gravel drive and turned onto the road, and in the rearview mirror she saw him standing there, not waving, not watching with visible emotion, just standing, solid and present, the way the land behind him stood. She drove back to Pine Ridge. She completed her 3 weeks. She went home to Chicago, put her apartment on the market, and called the clinic about a full-time position. It took 4 months to arrange everything. On the day she arrived back at the reservation with her car packed full, it was spring. The plains were coming back to life, green pushing through the frost, the sky enormous and open. Joseph was at the clinic when she walked in. He looked up from a conversation he was having, and he nodded, a single calm nod as if he had simply been waiting for her to arrive. She nodded back. She had found what she came for. She just hadn't known it would find her first.